Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here, and welcome to this public meeting on the new LYNX Blue Line South End Station. Today's meeting will consist of a presentation and then a Q&A session. We encourage you to submit any questions, comments, or feedback in the chat of this live video, and we'll address them at the end. Now I'd like to turn it over to Todd Thorne. He is a senior engineer here at CATS and is the project manager for this station.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm Todd Thorne, and I have a presentation for you tonight. I'm very happy to present the future South End Light Rail Station. I'm looking forward to explaining to you the background of our project, the options that we have considered for where the South End Station should be located, what we learned about those options as we have studied them over the last 6 months, and our recommendation for where the station should be located, as well as next steps and how this project will progress from now through the completion of the station. So on your screen right now, running from left to right through the middle of the screen is the LYNX Blue Line. And when the Blue Line was constructed, originally the area between the East-West Station and New Bern Station was primarily industrial. There were not a huge amount of people living close to the light rail line or a lot of popular destinations. And so it really didn't make sense to have a station in the area where we are considering putting one today. But obviously that has changed a lot since the Blue Line was built. And there are many more residential developments, apartment complexes, and also destinations and locations, shops and restaurants. And right around 2016, 2017, the city began working on the South End Vision Plan and to kind of plan out the future of South End, and worked with Charlotte Center City Partners and many of the other stakeholders in South End. And one of the findings that came out of that plan or recommendations was to look at creating a new station and improving connectivity in the area. One issue out here that quickly became apparent as more people moved in, as Publix grocery store was built and more apartment complexes opened up, is that it was very difficult to get across the tracks. There's about a 7-block gap between Remount and Tremont where there are no crossings, no street crossings, and no good way to get across the tracks. And that became an issue as more people needed to get across the tracks to get to nearby destinations. So that vision plan started a study called the South End Pedestrian Bicycle Connector Study. In 2019, that study wrapped up, and CATS determined that there was a very real need for both safety and connectivity to have a track crossing out here. But CATS determined the best option would be to combine that track crossing with the new station. And so that is where the South End Station came into being. And so we began this project. We hired a consultant team led by Kimley Horn in the beginning of this year in January. And we began planning to picking up from the work that had been done earlier in the vision plan and the connector study to try to see where the best exact location for a station would be. And so we are trying to get somewhere midway between Tremont and Remount, and also midway between the New Bern Station and East-West Station. So we began looking at two options, the south option and the north option. Both of these are intended to be very similar to what we have constructed on the Blue Line extension a few years ago. We will have two side platforms that are 15-foot wide each, with track crossings at either end and a 12-foot rail trail running along the outside edge of those platforms. Now, the south option at the upper edge next to Spectrum Apartments, that is a 20-foot rail trail because that section of the rail trail also doubles as fire access, and so it's required to be wider. And so the south option is situated between Spectrum Apartments and Publix, along with Junction 1504 Apartments and Camden Southline Apartments. And the main feature that we like about this is that it's a very flat area, so it's very easy to fit the station in with the adjacent developments as far as topography. The north option is just a few hundred feet to the north of the south option, and it's adjacent to Atherton Lofts, as well as 2161 Hawkins, which is the current site for Sycamore Brewery. Just to the north is a new development called the Line, and also it's adjacent to Hawkins Street condominiums, which are several shops in a row just south of Sycamore Brewery. This area is not as flat. On the west side, besides Sycamore, that area is, and we've worked very closely with Portman Holdings, who is developing the current site of Sycamore, or will be beginning construction on that soon. And we've worked very closely with them to create a layout so that their development will be right next to the rail trail, in fact, overhanging the rail trail a little bit in this area. And we like this area because there's going to be a lot of energy once that development is finished, and we'll be able to tie in directly to the new. There'll be some ground floor retail, both at the Line and at 2161 Hawkins. Also, this is right close to Atherton Mill, which is just to the north of Atherton Lofts, just to the right on your screen. And Atherton Mill, of course, has lots of shops and restaurants that also we were trying to connect to. There'll be a prime destination. However, the topography here is a little bit different. The rail trail today rises up above the tracks and runs behind the trolley barn, which is the building that's just on the bottom right corner of your screen, and rises up about 6 feet or so higher than the tracks where we tie into it. So that is why you see a switchback ramp there at the bottom right of your screen as well. And that is something that might or might not have been built or could be built because of the impacts to the trolley barn and to the development out here. There's also a row of transformers that is basically covering up. So there's some things to really like about this option, but also some real difficulties. So we looked at these two options and we came up with 7 objectives that we wanted to look at to see how these two options stacked up. We wanted to make sure that what we're going to construct out here will improve safety out here, we're trying to cut down on illegal or unauthorized track crossings where it's unsafe and people are understandably don't want to walk an extra 7 blocks to walk all around the area to get to a destination that's just on the other side of the tracks. We want to make sure that we're giving residents and customers and all the people in the area not just transit service, but also a way to get across the tracks in this area where there aren't any other ways to get across the tracks. So we're trying to, that kind of ties into connectivity as well. We have the rail trail running on both sides of the tracks through here, and we want to give people a chance to be able to move to one side or the other of the rail trail to get across the tracks, to get from South Boulevard to the rail trail and then to the Hawkins Street on the other side. We want to look at the design benefits of each of these and make sure that we are connecting people to the destinations they're trying to get to, as well as looking at everything that goes into the design at each of these sites. They're very similar, but they're also a little different. And one of the big differences is the kind of disruptions and who gets disrupted by the construction. So we are looking very closely at how construction could proceed and want to minimize the negative impacts of construction as we look at each of the sites and where each of these station platforms could be located. And also we want to minimize disruptions to the existing blue line. The intent is to continue to run the blue line during construction. There will be some changes or disruptions during construction, but we want to minimize those as much as we can and keep the trains running on time. And we also want to minimize how much existing infrastructure, whether that's storm drainage, whether that's the rail trail or anything out there that is existing, how much of that we have to rebuild and disrupt. And we want a cost-effective solution, a cost-effective station that uses our funding responsibly and well, and we get the most bang for our buck. So as we began looking at these, and we learned a lot as we studied these options. The south option really has a lot of difficulties at Spectrum Apartments, as we learned. So we would, in this case, we would have to acquire a good amount of land, about 15 to 20 feet of land, to push back the rail trail and the fire access to make room for a new station. And that would push the rail trail back on top of what today is a dog park and sidewalk and a nice landscaped area, a nice amenity at Spectrum Apartments. And that area is quite a bit lower, several feet lower than the rail trail. So that kind of makes an unfavorable condition around Spectrum Apartments. Also, there's no direct connections because of that drop off between the apartments and the rail trail, except from the sides of Spectrum Apartments. So that's not really an ideal connection. And also all the drainage from this entire area comes together and then crosses the tracks right onto Spectrum Apartments on some underground pipes, some large pipes that would have to be moved. And they run from north to south along Spectrum Apartments. That would have to be relocated and moved closer to the building. And of course, the fire access also would be moving closer to the building. And there may even be some requirements to do some upgrades to the building facade to bring it up to fire code. So after learning all of that, it would be very disruptive and very expensive and difficult to do. And so the south option kind of fell out of favor for all those reasons. The north option also had some real issues, not quite the as drastic of impacts as the south option, but it did have some real impacts that we learned. The accessibility of the station, as I mentioned, from the Atherton side, although we would like to be close to Atherton Mill, the issue is that from accessibility standpoint, we're not sure that we actually would be able to connect to the north end of the station. More than likely, the switchback ramp we're showing we probably wouldn't be able to build that, or we probably would not build that. And so that the access would all come from the south end of the station. And it just isn't a good setup to have the drop off, the ramp coming down from Atherton down towards Publix, right where all the people who are entering and leaving the station are coming. Also, the connections, a very important objective is to get good connections from the station and the rail trail to the side streets. The north option is fine for getting people to Hawkins Street. There's a sidewalk between Hawkins Street condominiums and 2161 Hawkins that exists today that connects people to Hawkins Street. To South Boulevard, there is a connection through Atherton just to the north of the station that connects to South Boulevard, but it's not especially wide or visible, easy to see from South Boulevard. And it's the entrance to a parking garage. So it's not a great place for a lot of customers it's not really intended for a lot of transit customers to come and go. So that also was a drawback to the north option. On the bottom picture here, you can see highlighted in yellow the overhead contact system that powers the blue line. There would be some major relocations to that are required by the north option. And this is an area where we have some heavy weighted poles that anchor the entire large segment of the blue line overhead contact electrical system that would have to be relocated. Would be very disruptive to our operations besides just the construction of the station. And we also get into, we have a substation that powers the blue line in this area that kind of fits between the two options. And if we build the north option, we are getting into that and would have to rebuild and relocate some of the power connections that power this area. So very disruptive, also very disruptive to Atherton Lofts, who is located adjacent to that. And you can see there in these two pictures that we would be pushing the rail trail away from the tracks towards the parking lot. And we would end up taking out some of the parking spaces temporarily, some of them permanently, and affecting the landscaping and taking out the sort of knee wall benches that you see, a row of 4 of those along the rail trail and some of the landscaping. And we could do some things to mitigate that, but there wouldn't be a lot of space between the rail trail and the parking lot. So for all of those reasons, that was also a very difficult option. So we looked at this and found that most of our issues came down to the 2 quadrants of Atherton Lofts and Spectrum Apartments. And so we evaluated a third option after we started to see some of the issues here, called the offset option, where we set a station platform along Publix just as we had it on the south option. And then we set another station platform next to what today is Sycamore Brewery and Hawkins Street condominiums, which is a little further south than we had it on the north option. And we have a single crossing between those two that also connects pretty well to the sidewalk that I mentioned that runs between Spectrum Apartments and Hawkins Street condominiums. That helps us connect to Hawkins Street. And then to connect to South Boulevard, there is a connection there are sidewalks running along the entrance exit to Publix between Publix and South Line Apartments, which is in the bottom left corner. So we feel like that gives the station, this gives the station the best visibility from the side streets and from the businesses and apartment complexes nearby, as well as it's the most accessible option. It eliminates the impacts to Spectrum and to Atherton Lofts, or most of those impacts, as well as minimizing the disruptions to the Blue Line rail service. And it really helps with those things. And for those reasons, it generally was the preferred option when we've gone out and we've done some stakeholder meetings with each of the developments in the project area. This offset option seemed to be very popular and was the preferred option. Also, this gives us better opportunities for staging for when we bring in construction equipment and construction materials. There's really not a lot of good opportunities out here to do that. It's going to be a major project challenge on any of these options, but this gives us a little bit better access to the 2 station platforms. We would likely build the south platform first, and then open up the rail trail on that side, and then build the north option. Potentially, we could have the track crossing in service as we were building the south option to help detour people on the rail trail around the construction site. And so we really feel like this option gave us the best of all worlds. And although, we think that the confusion with having this layout is a little different from any of the other stations we typically have, but without having any streets running through here, we feel like this option will be something that people will pick up and understand pretty quickly. And we also want to point out that what we're showing is very basic as far as the layout. This is just conceptual, what we have today. We have a lot of design work to go, and we will look at ways to really liven up and enhance the station to try to make it both visible and attractive and make it intuitive how to get to the station. And so that's something we're going to do in the future as we work through the design process. And we feel like this really gives us the best opportunity to work with to be able to do that and to fulfill the objectives that we were working on. So excuse me for just. Sorry about that. Sorry, bear with us for just a minute. So sorry about that. But anyhow, we have gone through this process, and our offset option that I just showed, that is our preferred option. And we have gone through a series of meetings to explain the project and to meet with different governing bodies to work through this process of selecting a station site. So we began with a stakeholder meeting in May with all the different developments in the area. And after that meeting, that is when we began to formulate the offset option as we started to understand what we were dealing with. We've presented to the TSAC, which is the Transportation Services Advisory Committee that advises CATS on customer related issues. We presented to Metropolitan Transit Commission, and we made our staff recommendation in July. Also in July, we presented to City Council's Transportation and Planning Committee, and we recently went back to our stakeholder group, which also includes Charlotte Center City Partners, and we presented the offset option and confirmed that is the preferred option, and there really has been so far no objections to it. And tonight we are having our first public meeting. Tomorrow we will have a second one in person at the Charlotte Urban Design Center, and that is near Bland Street Station. So I encourage anybody that is interested in talking with us or hearing more about this to come out. It'll be an open house type style of meeting. We'll be there from 4:30 to 6:30. You can drop in whenever is convenient, and we'll have staff there with some boards and handouts and other materials to discuss the project and what concerns we should be thinking about in the future and where we go from here. And then on August 24th, we will take this to Metropolitan Transit Commission a second time to adopt the offset option as our locally preferred alternative. So our overall project schedule, we are wrapping up the planning phases of this project, and we are funded partly with federal money. And so we have to go through an environmental NEPA process with the Federal Transit Administration, and we'll be doing that. We've already begun, but we'll continue that this fall and lock in our project funding before we can, and we need to do that before we head into design. We'll also begin our survey, so you may see surveyors out in the area early this fall. And we also will, parallel with that, we'll be evaluating how we can deliver this project best. Whether we do that, typically our projects have been design, bid, build, where we design the project, we advertise it to get a contractor, and then we hire that contractor and the contractor constructs the project. But in this case, we are considering using something called construction manager at risk, which would allow us to hire that contractor sooner. And that contractor would help us and advise us during the design of the project. And that would help us, we think, with planning for how we can build this project in very tight spaces without a lot of great access, how we can have the least amount of impacts both on the businesses and residents of the area, as well as how we can minimize our impacts on the Blue Line operations. So if we do that, we'll bring that contractor on during the early part of the design, and that will probably extend the design out a little bit, but design will be roughly 1.5 years. So we're looking at that beginning either towards the end of this year or the beginning of next, and running through 2023 and into 2024. And then in 2024, late 2024, we'll be bidding the contract out if we do that, or if we already have the contractor on, then that contractor would be bidding out portions of the project and advertising to bring on subcontractors so that we could begin construction either at the end of 2024 or 2025. And our schedule is to complete construction in the year 2026, and then we'll have a short testing phase following construction and begin rail operations by the end of 2026. So that is my presentation and on the South End station. And I look forward to hearing any questions. Please type those into the chat and I'll answer as best I'm able to.
Have a little break there. Thank you so much for that presentation. So we will answer questions in the chat, and I'll you can come up here and answer them as we see them, but I'll also be putting some information in the chat about the meeting tomorrow, about where you can send questions, and about where you can send questions, feedback, or other things unrelated to this project topic. But the first question I'll start with is this going to impact my commute times?
So this project will slightly increase the amount of time that a train takes when it runs along the Blue Line, just because it will have to stop at one more station, and it will cause the train to slow down and then pick up speed after it either enters or leaves the station. But it will not be a big change. It will be roughly a round trip, a one-way trip from I-485 station to Uptown will increase by about 90 seconds, maybe a little bit less than that once this station goes into operation. Now, during construction, there will be some temporary impacts to the schedule, and we're going to try to minimize those as much as we can. That'll be something that we study as we design this project. There may be some times where we need to run all of our trains on one track. So we may have to run some modified schedules during construction. But once the station is in place, then basically they'll just be the amount of time it takes for a train to stop, pick up passengers, and leave.
Great, thank you. Our next question. What is the expected width of the single crossing for the third option? Concerned that a single crossing would create a significant cross-track bottleneck.
Yes, we looked at that, and we felt like that most people were going to cross at that crossing anyway, even if we did provide 2 crossings. But we do want to look at that in the design phase, and we're already planning to widen that crossing. It would likely be a wider track crossing than what you see at a regular station today, since there would be a single track crossing there. So we don't have an exact dimension for that, but we are going to look at that track crossing and plan to make it wider than what you typically see out on the platform today.
Thank you. Our next question, would you have to consider bus bridges to help alleviate the issues during construction?
That bus bridges are something we will look at. We would only use bus bridges if there, for some reason, we had to shut the entire alignment or a section down. And that's not our plan right now. Our intent today, as we are looking at this project, is to keep the train open, even if one track may be temporarily closed, to keep trains running in both directions throughout construction. But until we get into design and we really look at exactly what we're doing, we really don't know for sure that we will be able to make that work. But the intent is to keep trains running And we feel like we can do that during construction for this project. We're going to try to bring in as much of the station prefabricated as we can. And the construction, the type of construction we put in this station will be quite a bit different than how we built the Blue Line extension, since we're working on active rail lines, but the end product will look about the same as what our current stations look like today. But we're going to be as innovative as we can be and creating some new construction methods to get this station in while we keep the trains active.
Thank you. The next question, kind of related, will the rail trail close during construction?
So portions of the rail trail will close during construction. The first part will be, today there is a gap in the rail trail behind Autobell. And so we will likely close the rail trail from Autobell to Publix. So that's behind Autobell, Publix, and Southline Apartments. And we'll probably have some construction staging behind Autobell, where we have some land there that's not developed, that's not part of the actual Autobell car wash. And we'll probably be running materials and equipment back and forth from that area to that platform at Publix while we build that area. So we'll have that section closed. The rest of the rail trail, though, would be open. And then we will build and rebuild the rail trail on the Publix side, on the east side of the tracks. And when we complete that, then we'll jump over to the other side. And then we would be closing, we're not sure exactly what section we would close, but at worst, it would be from the station platform location to the north up to Tremont. And that potentially could be closed while we build while we build the section of the station that is next to 2161 Hawkins and Hawkins Street. But then we hope, and we are going to study whether we can open the track crossing during that time and make it so that people coming from Spectrum Apartments, Junction 1504, Hawkins Street can cross the tracks at that time to get to the rail trail and detour the area that we have closed.
Thank you. Next question, is charging for electric bikes something considered on this and or future light rail station designs?
That is something that we definitely will take back and look at. I can say for sure there will be bicycle facilities at this station, and charging for electric bikes is not something that we have done to date, but it is something that we'll take back and look at and consider.
Thank you. And how will the construction affect the traffic around the area near transit?
That is something that is really difficult for me to answer right now, because we really don't know for sure how we're going to access this area. It's a very good question, because there are no public streets that lead to this, and we don't think we're going to impact public streets that much, but we have a few options, but I don't want to speculate on how we're going to access right now. That's one of the reasons why we're considering bringing a contractor in early, so that we can work out a plan of access and staging and figuring out where our materials and our equipment can be stored and how we're going to access the tracks and how we're going to access the station platform site for each phase of construction. So that's something that, as we work out exactly what type of construction, how we're going to build this, we're going to come up with that access plan. But really, it should not, we don't anticipate that there'd be any dramatic access to streets in the area.
Got it. All right, next question. When is the station going to be finished?
So the station right now, we have a long road ahead of us before the station will be finished. But as I mentioned, our plan is to have this station up and running by the end of 2026. And so we have to go through that design phase and hire our contractor and then get to construction. Construction will take longer than it would for a regular station, because we have to work around the existing Blue Line operations. So that is going to restrict when we can do certain activities. Also, we have to respect that there are a lot of people who live out here. There are a lot of businesses, and we're going to have to work really hard to minimize our disruptions to all of those people. And so that's going to cause our construction to take longer. But we're going to study how we can meet all those different goals and have the minimal amount of disruptions we can over the course of the next year.
Next question. Let's see here. Well, I'd just like to encourage everyone, if you're not putting your feedback or questions in the chat, or if your question doesn't get answered, please email southendstation@publicinput.com. We monitor that every day and are eager to answer any questions or take any feedback that you all have. We'll give it a couple more minutes here for any last minute questions in the chat. And just a reminder, there is an in-person meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, August 10th, from 4:30 to 6:30 at the Urban Design Center. You can access that from the Bland Street station off the light rail. Oh, let's see here. We have another question. Will this station be built with a 2-car capacity or a 3-car capacity?
Oh, very good question. Yes, this station will be built with a 3-car capacity. And eventually the plan is for all of CAT stations to be expanded to 3-car capacity. So we want to start with a 3-car capacity at this station. And so all of our design options were designed with 3 cars in mind. So basically the station will be roughly 280 to 300 feet long.
Considering that you have a grocery store in front of this future station, have you considered passes for sale at the Publix?
That is something that we have not had any discussions with Publix on, but that is a great idea, and we'll take that back and talk about that.
When do you officially decide on the location for the station?
So we have decided on what our project team feels is the best location for this station, which is the offset option. And we, unless we learn new information that causes us to rethink that, our plan is to take that offset option to present that to Metropolitan Transit Commission, which is made up of city and county, the mayors and council members and county elected officials to adopt the locally preferred alternative as the offset station. And so once that gets adopted, then that is our cue. We can begin to take that option into design. So right now, that is our choice that we have selected.
All righty. We'll take questions for about 2 more minutes. So put those in the chat, please. We'll be on here till 6:10. And again, you can email southendstation@publicinput.com. We got another question. What is the distance of the station and what streets will it go through?
So the station will not go through any streets, and it's about 300 foot long to be able to accommodate those 3 cars, 3 light rail vehicles. And so the connections will not go through any public streets, but there will be sidewalk connections. So pedestrian bicycle connections to Hawkins Street on the west and to South Boulevard on the east.
Have about 1 more minute to take questions. Have you considered adding gates and turnstile at stations?
We probably would not consider adding gates and turnstiles. Basically, this station is very open, as all of our light rail stations are, and it would be very difficult to enclose a station like this because the rail trail will be directly adjacent to the back of the station, the entire length of the station platform. So it'd be really difficult to enclose that station in and separate that from the rail trail. There will be markings to show where the rail trail begins and where the station ends, but we probably will not be using gates or turnstiles on the station.
Great. Well, that concludes our presentation and Q&A today. Thank you so much, Todd, for all that information. And we certainly hope to see a lot of you tomorrow at the in-person public meeting. And all that information and contact information is again in the chat. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.